Thank you. Well, it's always a great pleasure for me to be back in Sweden, and I have to say I have been to this area several times and I've always enjoyed it. I was particularly delighted because one of my friends in Sweden was Björn Tengroth, and he was chairman of the Nobel Prize Committee for Medicine and Physiology for a number of years. And when the committee meet, they're each given, each year, a little medal which is a facsimile of the medal that the Nobel laureate gets. And we were in a boat in Stockholm, and Björn said, "John, I thought you might like to see this medal. In fact, I'm going to give it to you. And that's as close as you'll ever get to a Nobel Prize." Now, I apologise for the spelling mistake that I've just seen, but that's one of the pleasures of PowerPoint. What I want to do is to actually get everybody here thinking slightly in a different way, because we've had a whole day at Presbymania, and I, for one, at the end of the day, don't know what the hell it is. And if I don't know what it is as a scientist, I don't know how I can fix it. So I want to sort of take you back and make you think just a little bit. I guess we are really part of the quest for the Holy Grail, and the cast includes Sudi and Klaus, as you can see here, plus many other players throughout the world. The one thing I have taken home today is that the biggest risk factor in presbyopia is age. So, how old are you? Well, even that's a problem, because the atoms you're made of are billions of years old. You're all made of stardust. And if we consider the molecules in our body, you may be as old as you think you are, i.e. the DNA of non-dividing cells may be the same age as you, or it may be only minutes or days or months, because you'll constantly manufacture proteins, carbohydrates, etc., etc. So I wonder if you would all bear with me for a moment and look at the person next to you and guess how old they are. Don't tell them. Now I want you to do it again as biomedical scientists. Why? Well, when you look at the person next to you, most of what you're looking at is either dead, i.e. their hair, or the surface of their skin, or maximally 5 days old, i.e. the surface of their lips, or the surface of their cornea. So, age itself is very complex, because there are whole groups of cells in our body, like our skin, which are maximally 5 days old, or the surface of the cornea. And then there are cells in our brain and our retina, which are post-mitotic, formed during embryogenesis, and have been with us for life. And aging is different in these two systems, because in the dividing populations, aging is really the point where the production of new cells is superseded by the death of old cells. By contrast, aging in non-dividing cells is the accumulation of errors throughout life, together with any genetic errors that you're born with. Now, the one thing that absolutely intrigues me is, how the hell do we reset the clock? My father was born in 1914, my mother was born in 1916, so a 26-year-old ovum and a 28-year-old sperm fused together to reset my clock. I was born in 1943, and that genetic continuum is completely reset. And that's a huge enigma in terms of how we age. And thank God for biological redundancy. In conception, we start with one cell. By the age of 18, you've got 100 trillion cells. If you look at the number of populations based on 5-day corneal turnover, you have potentially 12,000 cell divisions, of which we only use about, less than 6,000. So there's a huge redundancy there, and we could actually live on the cellular replacement basis for 160 years. And every day, you kill billions of cells. I mean, this whole system is so complicated. Now, the sad thing is, 88% of us over 65 have at least one chronic condition. At 40, everything either doesn't work or leaks. And if it doesn't leak, it creaks. And we've all experienced this aging process. Now, for the people interested in presbyopia, just look at this. This is the WHO figures. This is worldwide, not just the West. 2006, 1 person in 10 was over 60. A few years' time, 1 person in 5 would be over 60. In the middle of the next century, which I'm not going to be around for, unless things change, it's going to be 1 in 3. And look at this. Life expectancy. These are people that live to be 100. I mean, they're going up exponentially. The British government is now catering for 1.2 million people over 100 by 2074. I mean, age is a growth industry. 2006, 100 million Chinese were over the age of 65 with no pensions. And just think of the problems we're going to have with neurological diseases. WHO figures again, 2025, 100 million senile dementia patients. And many of these will be in government. Now, if you think about the aging process, there are many, many cofactors. Obviously, the best thing is to choose your genes, which unfortunately we can't do. The next best thing is don't expose yourself to radiation. And we all forget that light is radiation. And we have in the eye a really peculiar situation where the cells of the cornea are turned over. The lens is a sort of physiological tortoise, just about turning over, but the retina isn't turning over at all. So for 90 years or more, you have bits of your eye that not only have to contend with radiation, but have to absorb it and transfer it into the process that we know as vision. Now, the dermatologist will tell you straight away light is bad for you. Those pictures up there are transmuted cells as a result of ultraviolet. That lady is not wearing a leather jacket. That is because she has gone down to the beach in Miami every day and exposed herself to optical radiation. The skin people are telling us don't do it. Now, as far as the eye is concerned, we know that light does induce change. And these pictures are not a cataractus lens, they're actually natural luminescence as a function of aging. And presbyopia is attached to that process. Now, I find it quite fascinating. One of my teachers, Robert Wheel, a number of years ago, did a study again for the WHO in which he looked at the onset of cataract as a function of your location on Earth, and found that if you lived in a country like the UK with no sun, it was great. Your cataract was 10 to 15 years later than if you lived in a country with a lot of ultraviolet radiation, like India. And there's really good evidence from several other studies. Particularly, I was interested in this study from Australia, which divided Australia in terms of UV zones, and then looked at the prevalence of cataract as a function of age in the Aboriginals, people who have evolutionarily been adapted to cope with the load. But you can see there quite clearly that if you're in zone 5 with a lot of UV, you're going to have lens changes at a much faster rate. Now, this is a worry for all of us with the ozone layer story, because currently there is an ever-growing hole in the ozone layer over Antarctica, which is now 3 times the size of the USA. And already in Argentina and Chile, they're beginning to see earlier onset cataracts. So, cataract isn't presbyopia, but where do you draw the line in terms of aging? Where does aging physiology become pathology? Okay, so we've got an eye, and we know that it has to cope with light, and we know that the front part's concerned with image formation, and the back part is concerned with image detection. And we've all concentrated today on the lens. How old are man-made lenses? Well, the first lenses were Egyptian, 2,600 years BC. This lens is almost 3,000 years old in the British Museum. It's a crystal, and it is a lens. It's a beautiful lens. So we've had the technology for much longer than you think. And if you look at early artwork, it would be impossible to do some of these things at the scale without a lens. So lenses have been around for a long time. You guys are all sitting here in almost the capital of the industrial lens industry. Because the very first people to industrially produce lenses were the Vikings. Not to see with, but to light fires. So they had lodestone magnets to navigate their ships, and then industrially produced lenses to light fires. Okay, we heard this morning about the development of lenses to correct vision. And we see the first paintings in the 1300s and the first print in the 1400s. And surgeons were very early adopters of this technology. As you can see here, this surgeon couldn't quite make it without his spectacles. But close vision only really became important with the advent of printing. Before printing, you had an educated elite, mainly the clergy, who read big books which were handwritten, and there were very few of them. But when you had the advent of printing, now the masses needed to read, and because paper was expensive, books were small. So print became incredibly important in terms of the development of ocular corrections. Now, you know the UK is ahead of everything when we're trying to protect ourselves. So in 1629, the King of England gave a royal charter to the Worshipful Company of Spectacle Makers to maintain optical standards, basically to keep out cheap European imports, and mainly the Dutch. Okay, so we had a royal charter which meant that we could seize substandard spectacles and break them on the London stone with a silver hammer. And this is the oldest optical standards organisation in the world. Okay, now in London we have a very, very famous diarist, Samuel Pepys, who kept a record of the plague, he kept a record of the Great Fire of London. wonderful record of his amorous relationships with his housekeeper and many mistresses. But on Friday the 31st of May, he wrote what you see there, thought he had undone his eyes as a problem of writing his memoirs. But he was presbyopic. And if only he'd been around when Benjamin Franklin came up with his correction. Okay, so we've got image formation at the front and image detection at the back. And I spent most of my time working on the retina, and I had a holiday in the cornea, which was really great and lucrative. But let's look at the lens for a minute. I mean, this is a unique organ where every cell that's ever made is trapped inside the bag, the capsule. So it's little wonder that, as a function of age, the lens has a problem with waste disposal, because it can't get rid of anything. It can't get rid of anything outside the capsule. And so we have, as we all know, cataracts, and again, one of the oldest forms of surgery, where you just sort of stuffed a graphing knife type device in and pushed it out of the optic axis. Very interesting surgery. Now, who had the first idea of intraocular lenses? I want to see how read you are. Well, being a little bit of a sort of philanderer, I was delighted to find that Casanova was involved in the development of intraocular lenses. Because when he was in prison, he met an Italian oculist who said he could make little glass spheres and put them inside the eyeball. So please remember Casanova's role, because he took it to the court and promulgated the whole idea. I guess the real story that we all know, though, is Ridley and the Second World War, cockpits of Spitfires and Hurricanes blowing up and going into eyes and not setting up allergic reactions. So the IOL business was based on observations made during wartime. Now, what's made a big impact is really the advent of the Excimer laser, which I'm very pleased to say I was involved in. And the unique element of this laser is that it emitted photons which have around 6.4 electron volts in every photon. Now, you're held together by carbon-to-carbon bonds which have a bonding energy of around 3 electron volts. So if you absorb one of these photons, it blows it apart. You literally. And so this is a human hair with grooves cut in its surface. Okay, but this is some experiments that I did with Steve Trakell and Srinivasan at IBM. This is Srinivasan's hair, and he's now completely bald. But the concept was, with this degree of control, we could change the curvature of the cornea and its refractive status. And we held a meeting in Berlin in 1986, which was organised by Steve Trakell, being the American, he did the money. Theo Zeiler, this was a big mistake, being the German, he did the food. And John Marshall did the science. And Steve Trakell met my wife. Okay. Now, out of this, at the time, I was the only person that wanted to put big beams on the centre of the cornea, because I knew if I ran them under a computer, I could cut a negative lens. Now, Anne-Marie and Sherry, look, this paper, known as the monolimit formula, was Charlie Molyneux, Terry Coons and myself. It was turned down by every major journal in ophthalmology for 3 years. And then when it was accepted, it became the highest citation index for a year and a half. So the moral is, don't be too far ahead of your colleagues, because they just won't believe you. Okay, so with that technology we could cut negative surfaces, we could cut positive lenses, and with the advent of flying spots, we could do more or less anything we wanted. So, we had the technology, we had the formulation, and we had the patents, and unfortunately we had the FDA. But nevertheless, these early patents led to the foundation of Summit Technology, which was the first company to go through the FDA, and believe it or not, it was before Visit. So here was a revolutionary technology for changing the refractive state of the eye. Since then, there have been others. I mean, I thought this one was particularly good, and I'm sure none of you have seen Mr. Bolsover's problem, but it is clearly a potential problem. But let's get back to presbyopia. Now, I'm a simple scientist, and I like to think very simply. And for me, I don't understand the nuances here, but presbyopia is either. Because you have a whole set of theories based on changes in elasticity, you have another set based on volume, and you have another set based on atrophy. Okay? So just remember, presbyopia is either. What do we know about the lens? Well, the young lens, and these are scanning electron micrographs of the young lens, the fibers have both ball and socket joints and ridges. And it's the ball and socket joints that enable you to make the big changes in youth. And then when you reach an accommodative state, you lock into the ridges, which stop you wasting any more energy until you want to change accommodation, whereupon you release the ridges and you're back to the ball and socket. So that's how the young flexible system works. But we know as you get older, this system begins to seize up and not work as well as it should. In the young, we've got this lovely change in shape of the lens, but as you get older, the ability to change both the anterior and posterior radii of the lens decrease. So, clearly, part of this relates to elasticity of the lens. But just think of the zonules. The zonules run from the lens through the pars plicator into the pars plana of the retina. And if you're twitching that system throughout your life, it's either going to stretch or it's going to get a bit more rigid. Now answer this. Who makes the zonules? Okay, who makes them? And are they maintained? If so, which cells do it? There aren't any there. And are they repairable? If they break? Don't know. So here is a system which many of the techniques we've heard are dependent upon, but we don't really know very much about it. Do they stretch or not? Let's switch to volume very quickly. Look at this. The volume of the human lens doesn't change very much with age. Its density does, but the volume doesn't change very much. So, can it really be the lens gets too big and starts looking on the back of the iris? Don't know. What about the ciliary muscle? We heard in some studies that it atrophies. In other studies, it doesn't. So this is another one of those debatable areas. But if you start messing around with this end, and you ignore the gyropes of the zonules, you've still got to look at that, because that may also be playing a role there. Please note, the anchorage fibres of the zonules into the pars plicator valley, they go right back to the pars plana of the retina and almost interface with the retina itself. So when you have accommodation, that whole system moves, including the retina. The retina moves about 1.5 millimeters in the young. I mean, it's an incredibly flexible system. Okay, but why should we punish the cornea for the crime of the lens? I've sat here listening to you guys. I want to carve this shape, I want to carve that shape. There's nothing to do with the cornea. The cornea is an innocent observer here. So, what are you doing? Well, there's lots of things to do to the cornea. Inlays, eczema, femto, more recently cross-linking and uncross-linking. The lens, IOLs, femto, bag filling. I'm going to suggest cross-linking and uncross-linking. As we've seen today, the sclera. Great new target, virgin territory. We can have a crack at that now. Okay, so what have we done with the lenses? Well, swinging haptics, as I call them. In our hands, in Moorfields and St Thomas's, the most we ever got was half a diopter, and it was totally unpredictable. Axial placements. Multi-zone lenses. David Spalton had a classic. He put the first restore lens in the wife of a judge and asked her to write a report on what she thought of the vision. 1 month later, he got a 40-page report from the wife of the judge explaining she had perceived a differential light value in targets from far and near. In 3 months it came out. I have to say, I wouldn't be happy with one of these with current technology. Bag filling, I think, has some very interesting elements that I really would like to see. Okay, now there is some exciting technology here using femto to actually change the volume of the lens or to change the mechanical properties of the lens by breaking bits of the lens. When I first heard of this, I thought, that is a cataract machine. So the ophthalmologist gets 2 charges now, one for ablating the lens and the second for taking out the cataract. But I have now seen monkeys at 3 years using this technique which are still transparent. The lenses are still transparent. I just don't know why. But anyway, that's a whole new area to watch. There's some German companies and some American companies working on this. But my own preferred area at the moment is because I've spent a lot of time studying 2 membranes in the eye. One German, Carl Ludwig Buch, and the other Sir William Bowman. Both almost lived approximately at the same time. And I've spent a lot of time working on both of these membranes. Now with my colleague Ali Hussain, looking at Brooks membrane, we've been able to show that as you get older, the SH bonds in the collagen are converted to SS bonds. So Brooks membrane gets stiffer as you get older, and as it gets stiffer, it loses its capacity to transport metabolites and water. So, as a pre-underlying element of AMD, you really need to address this issue. And Ali and I have spent a lot of time now making Brooks membrane more elastic. We can make it less elastic, more elastic, we can switch it on and off. So we have the technology. I think this is great because now we can play around with the biodynamics of these various ocular tissues. Look at the cornea. This is me 30 years apart, and that's measurement with one of my fellows, Nat Cartwright, of Young's modulus using interferometry. And you can see it's getting stiffer, and it gets stiff for the same reason the SH groups are becoming SS groups. So as we get older, most parts of our body get stiffer. I say most parts. And most of you will have experienced that increase in stiffness. Now I'm indebted to Teo, who may be bad at organising food, but he had this really good idea for cross-linking the cornea in relation to keratoconus. And he had a technique, 30 minutes soaking with riboflavin, 30 minutes ultraviolet exposure at 3 milliwatts per square centimetre. And Teo, it worked. because in the FDA study now, it's really good that it either stops the process or in some cases makes these keratoconic corneas get a little better. In fact, it's the first time the FDA had given permission to place 100 of these systems because they feel sorry for the patients and don't want them necessarily to wait for the end of the FDA trial. It's a wonderful system. The FDA have never done it before. And I have to say, I do have a financial interest in this, fortunately. Okay, but where did Tao get that crazy figure from? Because 30 minutes soaking, 30 minutes ultraviolet radiation, my government won't pay for that because it's not cost effective. Well, he got it from this book, Environmental Health Criteria, Ultraviolet Radiation. But that was written by myself and David Sliding, one of my PhD students. And we only put that figure of 3 milliwatts per square centimetre for 30 minutes to make it easy for people. In reality, corneas absorb energy, not power. And energy is power times time. So 30 minutes at 3 milliwatts is exactly the same as 3 minutes at 30 milliwatts. You can play around with these too. And by decreasing the soak time, you can protect the endothelium because the riboflavin doesn't get back there. Okay, so we've now created a device, and I think this has potential in many, many different areas. It has potential in glaucoma, it has potential in refraction, it has potential in presbyopia. This device has an active tracker in that arm, so when you position it over the patient, it will track the eye. It has a shine-through type camera system which tracks the diffusion of the fluorescent material into the cornea, so you can hit the stroma at any level you want, or the sclera. And it has Star Wars deformable mirror technology, so we can cross-link topographically. So you can address lots and lots of really interesting things. So very simply, think of this: you put some riboflavin on the cornea, or the sclera, or the lens, ultraviolet radiation, change the tension of the fibres in a given area, and you'll flatten them if you do it in that central 3 millimeters. Here, these are 1 month, these patients are now up to 1 year. This is correcting myopia up to -3, 3.5. No surgery, transepithelial, so there's no pain, no biomechanical disturbance. Very interesting to look for the future. Now we've also been doing some sclera, similar to what we've heard from Anne-Marie and Sherry. And we've also been doing some lamina cribosa and scleral spur and several other things. But remember, this is just driving it one way, making it stiffer. But using the knowledge from the Brooks membrane studies, we can make it more elastic. So if you want to make things stiffer, great. If you want to make them more elastic, great. None of this involves blue pills. Okay, so thank goodness for this, the most forgiving element in refractive surgery, because it forgives us for most of what we do, and I'm sure it will in the future. So I'm grateful to the Angel of Norns. I don't think we're there yet, but I do think we will hit the Holy Grail very shortly.